static hash function, you know that it will return the same bucket address. So right, so whenever you give the input for the same input, it produces the same bucket address. It's known as static hash function. So that's what we were discussing. Same the resultant bucket data bucket address will always the same. So given some input, the hash key generation will generate the same bucket address. It's known as static hashing. So this hash function can be used for inserting a record or searching a record or deleting a record, right? So whenever you need to insert a new record into the table, you can again generate the address of the new record using the hash key. When the address is generated, the record is automatically stored in that location, right? Again, for searching a record also, whenever you need to retrieve a record, the same hash function can be used to retrieve the address of the bucket where the data should be stored, right? So deleting a record, you are going to retrieve the record using the hash function, and you are going to perform the delete operation, right? So this is about static hash function. So static hash function means it returns the same bucket address for the same input. So given some input h of k, you apply a hash function, it gives you the same bucket address. It's known as static hashing. So static hashing can be further divided into open hashing and closed hashing, right? So in the case of open hashing, instead of overwriting the older one, the next available data block is used to enter the new record, right? So this is also known as linear probing, right? So whenever you are going to perform open hashing, right, and you get a collision, right? So you get the same address for more than one input, a collision occurs. Rather than overwriting the address of the older one with the new one, so what we do is that the next available data block is used to enter the new record. It's known as linear probing, right? So for example, A2 is a record which you want to insert. So the hash function generates the address of the record as 222, right? So however, something it is already occupied by some other record or by some other value, right? So that's why the system looks for the next data bucket which is free 501 and assigns the record onto it. It's known as linear probing, right? So whenever given a new record, you are expected to generate the address of the new record using some hash function. So in this case, it gives the block addresses. The hash function generates the bucket addresses 222. The bucket is already full or it's occupied by some other value. So in the case of linear probing, the system looks for the next data bucket 501 and assigns the data record onto it. So it's known as linear probing, right? So the condition of bucket overflow is also known as collision, right? So in the case of a static hash function, whenever you are going to apply some hash function on a particular input and it results in the same output, right? So it results in collision. So this is a fatal state for any static hash function. So to avoid this, what we can do is that overflow chaining can be used, right? So we have seen overflow chaining even in the previous instructor ID example, right? So whenever you perform sum of the digits in an instructor ID mod 8, more than one record, it refers to the same bucket, right? So it's known as collision. So what we do is that when the buckets are full, a new bucket is allocated for the same hash result and is linked after the previous one. So this is known as closed hashing, right? So you are going to apply a hash function and it returns the value 1, right? So you are going to apply some hash function. So 1, 6, 11. So they all corresponds to the data bucket 1, right? So when the bucket is full, a new bucket is allocated for the same hash result and is linked after the previous one. So this mechanism is called closed hashing, right? right? So this we have already seen, right? So bucket overflow chaining occurs for bucket 5, right? So a bucket 5 can hold at most only 2 records. So what happens is that there is going to be bucket overflow chaining, right? So you have 4 records, they refer to the same bucket address, and the bucket size is going to be only 2 records. So what we do is that you add one more bucket where you can store block of records. It's known as bucket chaining, right? So when the buckets are full, a new bucket is allocated for the same hash result and is linked after the previous one. So this mechanism is known as closed hashing, right? So this is about working with open hashing and closed hashing, right? So you have chaining in the case of closed hashing, whereas in the case of open hashing, what we do is that we use linear probing that we have discussed already. Whenever you are using a hash function and it returns an address at which the data is already stored, the next free bucket is allocated to it. So this mechanism is called chaining, right? So for example, 1 mod 5 is going to be 1, and the 6 mod 5 is also going to be 1, right? So after 1, so 1 and 6 refer, so the input 1 and 6 refer to the same bucket address 1. So since the bucket is already occupied by the value 1, the next free bucket is allocated to the input 6. So this mechanism is known as linear probing in hashing.